Okay, so I think I don't need to reintroduce myself a lot, but I'll talk a bit more about what I do on a day-to-day basis. And but before I continue, how many people are familiar with the career that is product management? You for sure. And you other, what do you think it is about?
I think it is, you're the one who manages stakeholders.
Okay, you manage stakeholders?
Yeah, in terms of the devs as well as the people in higher management.
Okay, so you're the bridge there?
Yes, and you're basically conveying the information of what is needed and what needs to be done, and ensuring that that happens at the time that it's needed.
Okay. Any other tech? Please come to the front. It will do a lot for my confidence. Yeah, just come to the front. Any other tech? Okay, we'll talk a bit more about definition. So as I mentioned, my name is Kirui. I describe myself as a product designer, UX researcher, and sprint master. So the idea behind it is I work a lot with different organizations to help them conceptualize and build products. And the process that I use during that journey is the design thinking process. So many times it involves first doing a bit of research to ground the idea and get quick feedback, prototyping, testing, go-to-market strategy, the launch, and then the growth of the product. So if you think about it from a product life cycle, I am involved in almost each and every step. I currently run a team, the iHub software consulting team. We also known as Tanasuk Africa, based on a partnership that we have with the iHub. And at the moment, we're made up of 12 employees. And we have an interesting mix of design thinkers, and software engineers and project managers. And we usually describe ourselves as a design, thinking, and software consultancy company. So over time, we found that we don't take on digital problems only. Like, we don't only build apps. We've had many situations where clients want help thinking through their problems. So we just help people solve their issues. So this is a bit of my journey. And it's important in the context of the topic that I'm talking about today. So I started off at a company called Pesapal. I don't know if you guys know about it. Has anyone heard of Pesapal? So I used to be a web developer and a project manager there. And that's when I got to do a bit more in the software development space. So building, shipping, interacting with clients, and that type of thing. And I think my biggest takeaway at that point in time in my life was the fact that users are difficult, customers are difficult. Like, you build something, they're like, no, I don't like how it looks like. But you said you wanted it that way. And then you kind of realize you actually have to figure out a system that allows you to uncover that before you invest a lot of time into it. But I didn't take that lesson then. So instead, what I did, I decided to do more back-end API stuff. So when I left Pesapal, I became a freelance API engineer, not just any type of engineer. So I would do system integrations. You want to maybe integrate Visa or PayPal to your site. You want to integrate M-Pesa, like something that I don't have to think about, because the specifications are very, very clear. It's a small but a niche market, and the beauty was that it was quite a lucrative market. So I didn't do that for too long, though. And how it happened was actually interesting. I used to consult for the iHub consulting team as a project manager. And then the lead who used to run it then decided to go back to school. And they didn't have anyone else to take over. So I was the interim team lead for a month. But 3 years later, I was still there. So during my iHub consulting time, it was an interesting switch in the sense that moving from an engineer to now managing a team and doing biz dev was really, really shocking, in the sense that you used to being in that position where you wait for a project to be brought in, and then now you start doing it. But now you've been put in a situation where you have to look for the work, you have to recruit people, you have to retain people, you have to make sure that they deliver good work. So it was a bit of a challenge, but I think within about 6 months, I actually was in a better position to continue doing it. So I grew the iHub consulting team from an individual full-time employee to 17 at the end of 2016. I then took a 4-month break to think about life. And I actually didn't do much then. I can't remember what I was doing. And then something interesting happened. So when I was working with the iHub consulting team, I started doing a lot of design thinking work. So going out in the field, working with clients to actually figure out how they launch the product, how they get people to use it. So the next evolution of my journey or my career, I joined Eneza Education as their head of product. So that's actually like the time I got my hands or my feet wet when you talk about product management. And currently, I run the team at Tanasuk Africa. So the reason I'm sharing that is mainly because of this. If I look at my career, I've actually done quite a number of things. So I've been a software engineer. I've been a project manager. I've been a biz dev. I've managed and grew a team, and I've also done a lot of UX research. And lastly, I've been a product manager. So the idea is, when we talk about what product management is, it has an element of the different things that I talked about. And the way I like to break it down is, actually before we go there, do we understand this? Have we seen this before? What is this? Have you guys heard of the Bell adoption curve? How things get adopted in markets. It applies to anything that you do. So for example, think of something like maybe the iPhone. When it first came out, the innovators are the people who like really tried the first time. Like no one knows about it, it's not credible, no one has ever used it. There's always a group of people who are willing to experiment. These are the guys who will buy the Apple Watch, for example. They are always the first ones to jump on a product. And then now we have the early adopters, the guys who've heard a bit about it, they're not too sure about it, and then now they take on that. And then most people fall in the early majority and the late majority. The laggards are the guys who only move when it's not available anymore. So what example would we have? Let me think about. Like what technology has been phased out that people are forced to move? Any example? Yeah, Windows. Yeah, actually operating systems are good examples. The laggards usually wait until, for example, Microsoft says, we no longer support this. Or like even like look at your OS if you use maybe, I'm a laggard when it comes to updating my computer. So for example, I only do updates for Apple when they force me to. If they let me, I would never update it. So the interesting thing with this is it applies to the context that I'm talking about, product management. So if you look at the Kenyan ecosystem, if you look at the roles in technology, software engineers, design thinkers, product managers, graphic designers, people who do communications, the way it was adopted is the same approach. And the reason I'm sharing this particular thing is to just place where product management is in the Kenyan context. It's mostly in the early adopter sector, so it's still a relatively new thing. So let's now go a bit more into the definition. When defining what product management is, it's a cross-cutting discipline that lies at the center of 3 different circles. In a technology environment or in a company that builds or sells digital products, you'll usually find it to be a role that has a customer element to it, so that's the users. And then there's the technology element to it, and then there's the business element to it. So the center of it is product management. How do you define it? Exactly this.
I use the acronym CEO, Chief Everything Officer.
Everything Officer. Oh, because you have to touch on all those bits and pieces. So, I mean, it's easy to see that, and it won't really make sense. So what part of the business do you do? What part of the customer do you do? And what part of the technology do you do? And what skills do you need to do to have to be able to pull it off? So let me quickly break down for each of the elements what you do. So from the business part, so keep in mind that companies build digital products to grow and succeed. So as a product manager, when we talk about the business part, it's a lot to do with identifying how the product can make money for the company. So something that you'd probably have to figure out, and it's not by yourself, is how do you price? Like how much do customers pay? Or like what's the business model? How do you actually make money as a company? And then generally, products have many functionalities. So you'll also have to figure out what do you actually push out. Maybe you have 5 different features. Which one is the most prominent one? So think of a product like Instagram. They have stories. They also have the feed. And then they now have IGTV. Like how do you actually go about thinking through each of those? And how do you present it in a way that you push people in the direction that you want to go to? The last one, which is really, really important, is the product metrics. So, I mean, it's really important. In order to know if you're succeeding or not, you need a process through which you measure. So the idea behind product metrics is beyond, for example, simple metrics like number of downloads. What other things do you track within the product? So as a product manager, or the product management discipline actually helps define this. Related to the product metrics, product management is also about coming up with the product strategy and the vision. And these tend to be closely tied to the company vision, but they are different. They are not exactly the same. So generally, a company will come up with their vision, the bigger one, like what do you want to achieve? And then now you will distill it to how does the product actually help us go through that process? And then from the product strategy and the vision, you then narrow it down to like the roadmap. So would someone care to define the roadmap to me? For me, rather. Any takers? Anyone? What's a product roadmap? Oh, no volunteers. Okay, so how do you decide what features to build? You do that using the product strategy and vision. Like you get a bigger idea of this is what we want to present to our customers or our users. The roadmap is more of like the order in which, so for example, I'll go back to my lazy example of Instagram. They started with the feed, and it was in a certain way. And then internally as a team, you need to know we are focusing on this for this, probably this month, this quarter, this year, and maybe for the next couple of, maybe 2 or 3 years. So you need to have a clear idea internally on what you're trying to ship and build and ship rather. So the product management discipline is what takes the lead on this. So this is not an exhaustive list of what you do as a product manager in the business element, but those are the most critical parts to it. It also has so if we go back to our circle, when you talk about the customer, I'm representing it as the UX element, because the customer is all about the user. So in the UX part, the first thing that now the product manager does is to encourage the adoption of the design thinking approach and the culture across the different segments. I think from the earlier session that we talked about, one of my key takeaways was that people tend to think about design thinking and UX as a separate function in the organization. So you have your UX team, let them do it. No. We've gotten to a point where you want everyone to use the same approach because it's a problem-solving approach. So one of your key roles as a product manager would be that. And then the second critical one is you're the voice of the user within the organization. So when you're having those internal discussions on what should we do, what should we build, you're the one who's always advocating for what the user would ideally want. And where does that come from? It comes from your user research. The last part, and then I'll talk about now more about the part that probably you won't know all this. So the technology angle of it is, now that you have a vision, you have a strategy, you have a roadmap, you've done your user research, you understand what the market needs, it needs to be built. So you don't just hand over everything and say, like, see you, like maybe 3 months later we'll talk and then you let me know. You're actually still involved at that stage. And the most critical part, the first one, is more to do with you liaising a lot with the dev team to plan what to be built. So like when I was at Eneza, for example, I used to be involved in the sprint planning process. So we would do our backlog and understand, like, these are the features that we want to do within this period. So what do you want to do for the next 2 weeks? And you'll actually be instrumental in doing that and making sure that, one, you don't lose sight of the user, and two, you don't lose sight of the product vision. And in certain situations, the management team or other units within the company, especially for younger companies who don't have like a big staff count, you probably have to do a bit of data crunching. So if you can run like quick reports to provide critical information, that would be the technology part that you will have to be involved in. The part that you probably won't touch on is the actual coding. So shipping features, that will be rarely a product manager role. If that happens, probably you have a dual role. It's not just a product manager. The last one, which is very, very critical, and I think will actually define if you succeed or not, is your ability to help different departments within a company get what they need done. So for example, if I go back to my Eneza education example, there's a marketing team, there's a customer support team, there's a content team, there's a biz dev team, and all of them have technology needs. So it's your role as a product manager to go and talk to them, figure out their pain points and the gaps in their technological gaps, and then come and plan with either the management and the dev team what will be built first. And that's actually, I think, the reason you're in the center. Because unlike other roles, like for marketing, I probably don't need to interact much with other people. But for a product manager, you're basically working with everyone within the organization. So I, for example, used to go to the customer care call center, and maybe for an entire afternoon, be one of the people listening in and like just seeing what they do and how they use the tools that they have. I couldn't take the calls because, my Kiswahili, it's, and you're talking to students, so, and as education provides revisional content for primary and secondary school students on a mobile device. So you can't be talking to the student in broken Kiswahili. Yeah, so as I mentioned, you don't need all of this, but you need at least two. I don't know if you remember the senior dev discussion that we had yesterday. It's the same principle. So you probably have to be, you can be strong in two and then learn a bit more of another. Then at some point, you probably now get a team around you that can now take on certain elements of it. So for example, on my part, it's been so long, I'm no longer strong at the technology part. So I think my biggest nightmare at Eneza was learning again to like do SQL queries, do analysis and all that. I had not like coded for such a long time. So it was a really, really big challenge. Okay. So from a career progression perspective, and I think the reason this is important, as human beings, we always want to grow and get better. So how does it look like? So you'll probably join as an associate product manager, so someone learning. So definitely what is expected of you is a bit, it's not like, for example, you won't do the product strategy because you're at a more junior level, and your bandwidth is a bit lower, and your understanding of go-to-market strategies, the business environment might not. So for the first part, associate product manager, probably you're very weak on the business part. And then you'll probably grow into, what are those things? Oh, those came into the slide by accident. You'll probably grow now more into a product manager. And at this point, a lot of the work that you will be doing is the team coordination. So figuring out so-and-so needs this, and so-and-so needs this, and then sitting down with the developer team to build, ship it, and then iterate on it. After some time, you will now get to the senior product manager role, where you can now look at the bigger picture, what we want to do. And along the line, it doesn't, so probably by the time you're a senior product manager, you probably have a product manager working for you and probably another associate product manager. And at the senior product manager level, you will be able to do things a bit more in a strategic way, so you won't be needed on a day-to-day basis to do all the work. The one that you probably can't run away is user research. Because your customer is, I think as a company, the most critical thing that you need to understand is your user. So, and it's always important to make sure that the senior people in the team understand that. Because in our culture, it's very easy for your opinion, for example, about a user research that you did as an associate product manager to be ignored and the management to rely on their experience. So you'll probably never let go of that. For larger companies, probably the next transition would be the VP level, and then chief of product. And then probably after that, you need to go. Yeah, or become the CEO. Beyond that, it's a bit harder. And I think you've even seen it with the larger companies out there. One of the biggest reasons I would say you should get into product management, if we look at this is basically what it takes to run a company. So you can imagine if you gain deep knowledge about these three different things, you're in a very, very good position to actually start your own company and succeed, because you know how different things work together, why you need to focus on the customer, why you need to figure out the technology part, what's possible and what's not possible, and what to use at what point, and also how a business runs. That sounds easy. Why should you do it? So we understand the idea of some demand and supply. And the Kenyan startup ecosystem is at an interesting stage at this point. And I think the number of product management advertising, the number of roles advertised for product management in any ecosystem is a good measure of how mature an ecosystem is. So typically, when a company is starting out, most of the times the product manager is the founder or the CEO. They are the ones with the idea and the vision and what they want to achieve. But as you grow, what happens, for example, as a startup, you start fundraising. You get a bigger team. And you can't, as the CEO, continue heading the product unit. So that's now when they start advertising, mostly for the head of product role. So from a supply and demand perspective, the Kenyan tech ecosystem and the likes even of Nigeria and South Africa, South Africa is a bit further down the line, they're at that inflection point where there are a lot of advertisements for product management roles. But the supply it's really, really low. There are very, very few product managers out there. So this is a good time to get into it, knowing we remember this, knowing our Bell adoption curve. And if you look at the history of a lot of innovations and a lot of the things that happened, even in the data science space, if you get in early, you tend to reap more than someone who got in at the late majority. You can still afford to jump in at the early majority, but by the time it gets into the late majority, what happens from a demand and supply perspective is you have a saturation of that skill, and as a result, the wages are a bit more depressed, and like there are more competitors. So the reason I would say you should get into product management at this point is within the next couple of months, it will be the most sought skill out there. So I took a screenshot of some of the roles advertised. So there's an M-Pesa product development manager, there's a technology product manager at Andela, there's a senior product designer manager at Sun Culture. There are quite a number, so if you just go online or go to any of these jobs board and filter it by the role, you'll actually see a long listing of product manager roles. And on almost every other week, I get someone reaching out to me asking if they can hire me as their head of product or their senior product manager. And of course, I can't do it at this point, seeing that I'm running another company, but the opportunity is immense. So if it sounds all rosy, why are people not getting into it? Any idea? Come on, guys. Any idea? Sorry? You have to be creative. So that would imply people are not creative. Okay.
I think also getting a blend of the three aspects, it's not really easy.
Also, getting the three skills is not easy.
Yeah.
Okay. What if we removed one?
But that will be a personal initiative.
Oh, okay. Any other reason? Feel free to chip in. You have more experience.
I think exactly what people are saying, resonating, is that they're scared to jump in because they feel that their task is too big. But it actually isn't. That's why you have a team. It's about managing that team and getting out of your comfort zone.
Oh, okay. So, it's hard. That's the first thing. You might get fired. So, have you ever heard of the idea of a leader without a role? I don't think in any company there's a role that is like product management. Think of the fact that you have to go to the marketing team, you have to work with the dev team, you have to work with everyone, and most of these people don't report to you. So you really need to figure out how to be a leader without a role. Because, for example, if I'm working with the dev team, I have to convince them to actually see it my way and do it like the way I'm thinking about it. I can't say, like, you can't pull like it's instructions from the top. It's not possible. You have to make sure that you deal with different people and convince them, get them to buy into what you're trying to do. And that doesn't come naturally, especially in our environment where it's a very top-down, where the boss says, this is what you're doing, and then everyone whispers until it gets to the person doing it. So that's a huge, one, mental block as an individual getting into product management. Two, as an organization. So many organizations are actually not ready to have a roaming person in the team. It's always like very siloed. So you're from the marketing, your JD is clear, this is what you do on a day-to-day basis. And then you're a dev, this is what you do on a day-to-day basis. But if you looked at how I define product management, it's a cross-cutting role that has many different touch points. And you need to juggle things a lot of times. So you always need to know how to prioritize what to focus on. So for example, you'd get into an organization, and from my experience, they generally have, so an organization can be, a startup or a company can be poor either at the technology part, so that would be planning and shipping products, so maybe the process is a bit messed up, or they might be really poor at the customer part, where they are not doing their research and that type of thing. They're just building things internally and wondering why it's not picking up. Or it might be worse. They don't understand the business element. So as a product manager, your first role when you get in is to figure out which area to focus on so that you can show impact. Because what usually happens is, being a roaming role, a lot of things are rarely attributed to you. So when features are shipped, Who gets the praise? The dev team. But when marketing improves because they have a better dashboard, the dev team and the marketing team are praised. When a company can do customer care better because maybe you've done a new dashboard, who gets the praise? And then on the flip side, when it doesn't happen, who gets fired? Exactly. Last but not least, which is actually not captured on this, the challenging part element. If you go back to this slide, you will notice that most of the advertisements are for senior roles. So how do you get, from a career path perspective, how do you get here without starting there? So unfortunately, like, we still have the market dynamic where all the companies, or most of the companies looking for this role, are looking at it from senior product manager all the way to VP of product. But where is the space to learn the earlier parts? Yeah, so those are the challenges with this particular industry. But all in all, it's really challenging, it's really interesting, and the biggest value, I would say, especially if you want to be an entrepreneur at some point, it will really, really teach you a lot. Like, it's baptism by fire. One thing that I failed to omit, if we go back to, or rather one thing I failed to say, if we go back to my career progression path, so in this role, I only lasted for 5 months. I got fired for many reasons, but a key reason that as a product manager or as the head of product, why you'd get fired is many times the CEO hires a product manager, but they are not willing to let go of the product. So you come up with ideas, and most of the times, if you have actually studied the discipline and learn how to go about it, there's an approach to it. You just don't throw things at the wall and hope something sticks. So when you try to introduce those changes, there can be a lot of friction within the team and within the organization, and then you'll be seen to be disturbing something that was working. So it's very, very likely that you'll lose your job. Yeah. I think that's it. Questions? Any question? Sure.
For me, I've been trying to get in this role for quite some time.
Okay.
But as you said, it's not there. They look for the senior from the product. So as an entry point, how would you advise someone?
Okay, so we remember the circle. The easiest way to get in is to focus on one of these areas first and be really, really good at it. And I would say, like, the one that would work best for you is design thinking. Like, get in as a designer, really understand the customer element of it, really get to know, okay, because, and I think you can attest to it, you're juggling so many different roles, and you have to think through so many different things. And looking at the maturity level of our ecosystem, we're still not there yet. Companies are struggling to recruit head of products and senior product managers. So if we had more senior product managers and more head of product, they actually would have the bandwidth to now recruit a junior. So in the meantime, before we actually get to that point where we have that maturity in the ecosystem, my suggestion would be to focus on this circle. Identify one first. Business is the hardest one to start with because now it's a bit harder to come back to product management when you get into the business part. You'll probably go on and become a biz dev or become the chief BD or the marketing person. So I usually encourage people, if you can, do the technology and the customer one, be really, really good at it, and then now you will be better positioned to transition into the product role. Yeah.
I'll explain my journey to becoming a product director.
give you the microphone. Just introduce yourself and
Yeah,
then.
so my name is Tanvir. I work with Geopol, but transitioning out of Geopol as well. So my career started back in 1998 as a junior accountant.
Oh.
So I've been working for about 19 years. And yes, I am 42. And so from an accountant, I became a DBA. From a DBA, I became business development and pre-sales. Then from pre-sales, I got into technology, specifically operators, MNOs, and telecoms. And then from there, I progressed into general manager, managing director. And then from there, I got into a junior role for product management because it was still new. And then finally got into senior products, and now moving on to something a bit more senior. But yeah, it's hopefully it won't take you that long, but
Yeah,
the progress has been. So I've had the finance side of it has helped me a lot on maintaining the P&L for products. The DBA
The
part of-
business part now.
the business part.
Yeah.
The initial DBA part of it helped me with the technology, data science, and analytics. And then moving on to just general management, it was resource management, and then eventually moving into a larger organization. So I was working at Airtel Group, so I was running 17 operations, designing products for them from a technology point of view. So that fed into that, and then eventually all of it came together, and that's what helped me become a product manager.
Yeah, but don't be scared. It does. Most
It-
things
it's
don't
a-
take that long anymore.
Yeah, it's a fun journey.
Yeah, yeah. You really learn a lot in the process. Any other question? No other question. I still have time. Charles, are you sure you don't have a question? Okay. Is Lance ready? Okay. I think that's it. Oh, okay. There's one here.
Okay, cool. So, Amagi, the question is, if you get all the blame for issues that occur, which I understand happens, how do you manage also getting success and being recognized for that? Because if you're not able to have your ego stroked, that means you're not able to keep up with it, even when things go down.
Oh, okay. That's actually an interesting question, and it's probably, I think, one of the biggest things holding back product management in our ecosystem. The idea that you have to get direct praise for something instead of the team getting praise for something. But the thing that I figured out, one, especially in a company that's not used to the product management culture, a big measurement for success would be creating processes. So I think for me, one of the things that I did really well with the team at Eneza when I was there was I was really able to streamline how they do feature requests. Oh, sorry. Still have 15 minutes. I'd done 45. One of the things that I'm really proud of was being able to create a transparent process through which people ask for things. So as a marketing person, if I wanted a new feature or I wanted a new dashboard, I rolled out Jira. Like for tracking, like if you need something, put it there, and then we'll actually look at it as the product team, and then now review like when we will do it. So creating that transparency within the team, everyone could actually see, Kirui did this. Now, as someone who never used to get their features done, they are getting done. The second part, and you'll notice not all of them are direct. The second part is your ability to get more teams to work together. So more often than not, especially for large organizations that have different departments, there are silos everywhere. So you'll realize that the marketing team doesn't talk to the customer care team, that doesn't talk to, like no one is talking to each other, yet they're selling the same product, and different people have different understanding of a similar problem. So came up with the concept of a growth team, where you get people from different departments to work together to achieve something. It will still be other people working, but who made it happen? It would be you. The other opportunity through which you can actually show your work if the company is struggling in terms of how they track their metrics, I don't know if you guys have heard the concept of vanity metrics. Like metrics that actually don't make a difference to your bottom line. A very good example is downloads. Number of downloads is one of the most misleading metrics out there in the world. From my user behavior perspective, I can download an app and actually never open it. Or I can download an app, open it, maybe I struggle with the registration part, and I leave it alone. Or maybe I go to the next step, downloading an app, registering it, but actually don't do anything meaningful on it. Or maybe I go a step further. Download, maybe do my first transaction and never come back. So as a product manager, an opportunity for you to actually show the value of your work is to really help your organization understand what they need to track and what it means to the business. And the most critical metric in all that is what we call the North Star metric. So the idea is, for any company, there is one metric, if it improves, touches on every part of the organization. So there's a thing called the Pirate metric. So it's a framework through which you think how to develop metrics for your startup. And the way it works is you focus on, I think, 5. How you acquire customers, how you activate customers, how you retain customers, how you get your customers to refer people, and how you get revenue from it. And if you look at it from that perspective, it actually touches on everything. So the marketing team will do a lot of work to acquire customers. But if they are not acquiring the right customers, those customers won't be activated. Like, they will never do anything. They may just sign up and never do anything. And then, if you don't retain the customers, that probably means maybe your content team or the value of your product doesn't make sense. So that's as a product manager, you can make a big difference in that, because they will actually see the impact of your work. The last one is on the research part. If it's an organization that doesn't have a strong research culture, it's something that you can easily implement and show. And generally, if you're getting into an organization that doesn't have the product management culture, research is a good place to start. It's quick wins. Like, they'll quickly see the impact of your work. If you focus a lot on the processes, they'll be like, by the way, what does Kirui do? We never see it. But your work is making other people's work be better. But knowing our environment, the places that we work in, it's easy to know. But I totally agree, you can't entirely live on just you getting all the blame and people getting the credit for your work. Any other question? Or we can call it a wrap. Yes? Or we can call it a wrap. Okay, thank you. Last one, and then it's time for lunch.
Okay, cool. So you've mentioned that the CEO and the product manager are usually in loggerheads sometimes, because the CEO is more of, I've created this product, I know where I want it to go, and all those things, right?
Yeah.
So how do you balance your work as the product manager, because you're the heart of the business? They are no longer the heart of the business because now they're the CEO. How do you know how to stick to your own lane and still support the CEO in whatever he wants to do, or she?
So I would say you need to figure out how to create a relationship between the two of you that still allows him to feel that it's his product. So, for example, in my last role, I think my former CEO was the guy who used to come up with the best ideas. Like, he was really, really good at that part. So what I ended up doing is figured out how to plug in his ideas in a way that he still feels confident about the fact that he's contributing to the product, so that it doesn't be like now you've delegated your CEO to only doing the fundraising and managing the team. Because think of how passionate founders are. Like, they're really, and the reason you're there is because they've been able to do a good job to get to that point. So you can never totally ignore them. And I think I would say, in hindsight, that's one of the mistakes that I made. Like, just I should have spent a bit more time trying to figure out that relationship that allows us to leverage on each other's strong points. I'm really good with growing things, probably not as good as with coming up with ideas. So then it would have been a better pipeline to just see where do we meet each other and how do we build on each other's strengths. Okay, cool. I think it's time for lunch. Thank you so much. I hope you've learned something. And see you.